The blood on Katherine Carter's sleeve had dried to a rusty brown as she stumbled through the darkness, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the lights of Silverwater, Colorado faded into the distance, but not far enough to ease the terror clawing at her chest. 3 days a widow though the town thought otherwise, and she was certain every shadow concealed a lawman ready to drag her back to the gallows for a murder she'd committed in desperate self-defense. The year was 1873, and Katherine had spent the past 4 years learning exactly how much damage a man's hand could inflict without leaving visible marks. Vernon Blackburn had been a respected businessman to the good people of Silverwater, a charming gentleman who donated generously to the church and tipped his hat to ladies on the street. None of them saw the monster who emerged behind closed doors, the man who had slowly, methodically broken her spirit until the night she finally broke his skull instead. A cold October wind sliced through her thin dress, sending violent shivers across her body. Katherine had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket tucked beneath her collar. The mountains loomed ahead, indifferent to her plight, promising only a cold death if she couldn't find shelter before dawn. Her ankle twisted on an unseen rock, sending her sprawling into the dirt. Katherine bit back a scream, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her as she forced herself back to her feet, each step slower than the last. The moonlight that had guided her path vanished behind thick clouds, and with it, the last of her hope. Katherine didn't hear the approaching horse until it was nearly upon her. The rhythmic pounding of hooves against packed earth grew louder, and with it, the certainty of her capture. She lurched off the trail, seeking refuge in a cluster of scrub pines, pressing herself against the rough bark as if she might disappear into it. The rider slowed, and Katherine held her breath. He was nothing but a silhouette against the night sky, a tall man atop a magnificent horse, his broad shoulders squared beneath what appeared to be a long coat. A rifle was mounted to his saddle. "Hello," his voice carried in the still night air. "I know someone's there. I can see you moving." Katherine remained frozen, calculating how far she might run before he inevitably caught her. The man dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "I mean no harm." He kept his distance, standing beside his horse. "Are you hurt? It's dangerous to be out here alone at night." "Stay back," Katherine warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please just ride on, madam, there's a storm coming." He gestured toward the mountains. "And these parts ain't safe after dark. Wolves, mountain lions, desperate men." He took a step closer, then stopped when she flinched. "I'm Xavier Morrison. I run cattle about 20 miles west of here." Katherine said nothing, measuring the distance to the trees beyond. If she ran now, "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. "Or someone." "That's none of your concern." She tried to sound defiant, but her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "No, it ain't," he agreed easily. "But that doesn't change the fact that you'll freeze to death before sunrise dressed like that." He moved back to his horse and pulled something from his saddlebag. "At least take this." He tossed something that landed at her feet. A blanket, thick, woolen, and smelling faintly of leather and horses. Katherine stared at it, then at him, suspicion warring with desperate need. "There's a cabin about 3 miles up this trail. It belongs to a friend who's gone east for the winter. You're welcome to use it." He mounted his horse again, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Or don't. But that blanket might save your life either way." Katherine remained silent, unable to process this unexpected kindness. "The cabin has provisions," he continued. "Enough to last a while if you're careful. Doors not locked." He gathered his reins. "If you decide to stay, hang a piece of red cloth in the east window tomorrow. I'll know you're there and bring more supplies." His voice softened. No questions asked. With that, he tipped his hat and turned his horse, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving Katherine alone with the blanket and a choice she never expected to have. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. The immediate warmth brought tears to her eyes. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, but death from exposure was a certainty without shelter. With no real alternative, Katherine continued up the trail, following Xavier Morrison's directions with each painful step. The cabin materialized like a mirage just as her strength was failing. It was small but solid, built of sturdy logs and nestled against a hillside for protection from the wind. As promised, the door opened with a gentle push, revealing a simple but clean interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a neatly stacked pile of wood beside it. Katherine's legs finally gave way once she was inside. She collapsed onto the rough wooden floor, still clutching the blanket around her shoulders as if it might shield her from more than just the cold. Outside, the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, cutting off the path behind her. She didn't know if she'd made the right choice, but at least she'd live long enough to find out. Morning came with blinding whiteness as sunlight reflected off fresh snow. Katherine had spent the night huddled near the fireplace, too afraid to sleep deeply, startling at every creak and groan of the cabin settling. Her body ached from the hard floor and her desperate flight, but she was alive, and for the first time in years, she was alone. The cabin was larger than it had appeared in the darkness. A single room with a bed pushed against the far wall, a table with 2 chairs, and a small shelf of provisions. Everything was simple but meticulously organized. A hunting rifle hung on pegs above the door, and Katherine eyed it with a mixture of fear and relief. She had no experience with firearms, but its presence offered a measure of protection. After checking that the door was securely barred, Katherine explored more thoroughly. She found a wash basin, soap, and several changes of men's clothing. The clothes would be far too large, but they were clean and warm. In a trunk at the foot of the bed, she discovered blankets, a shaving kit, and most precious of all, a small first aid kit. Katherine stripped off her filthy dress, wincing as dried blood pulled at the cuts on her arms. Vernon's final attack had been his most vicious. The memory of that night flooded back as she washed herself with cold water, each bruise and laceration a testament to her desperate fight for survival. He had come home in a rage, carrying the scent of another woman's perfume and whiskey. His eyes had held that familiar flat coldness that always preceded the worst beatings, but this time had been different. This time he'd pulled a knife. "I've grown tired of you, Katherine," he had slurred, advancing on her in their bedroom. "So very tired of your disappointing face." She had backed away until the dresser pressed against her spine. "Vernon, please, you're drunk. Let me make you some coffee." Always the dutiful wife in public. He'd laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "But I know what you really are, nothing but a barren, useless burden." The knife had glinted in the lamplight as he lunged forward. Katherine had thrown up her arms, feeling the blade slice through her sleeve and into her flesh. In that moment of blinding pain, something had broken inside her, not her spirit, but the chains of fear that had bound her for so long. Her hand had found the heavy brass paperweight on the dresser behind her. Vernon never saw it coming. The sickening crack as metal connected with bone still echoed in her ears. Katherine pushed the memory away, focusing instead on cleaning her wounds and bandaging them as best she could. When she was finished, she dressed in the man's clothes, rolling up sleeves and pant legs until they fit well enough to move freely. Then she set about starting a fire in the fireplace, grateful for the matches and kindling left neatly beside it. As warmth gradually filled the cabin, Catherine's thoughts returned to the stranger on horseback, Xavier Morrison, a cowboy who had handed her a blanket and the chance to survive. His offer of help without question seemed too good to be true, yet here she was, safe for the moment in a cabin he had directed her to. Catherine moved to the window and looked out at the snow-covered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine white world that sparkled in the sunlight. It was beautiful and utterly foreign to her. During her years with Vernon, she had rarely been allowed outside their home except for church or social functions where he could display his perfect, obedient wife. Her gaze fell on a faded red bandana hanging from a peg near the door. Xavier's words returned to her. Hang a red cloth in the east window. He would bring supplies. But could she trust him? Men, in Catherine's experience, rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Yet what choice did she have? The provisions in the cabin would last a week at most. After that, she would need to venture out or starve. With trembling fingers, Catherine took the bandana and moved to the eastern window. She hesitated, holding the fabric tightly in her fist before finally draping it across the windowsill. The bright red stood out starkly against the white landscape, a signal, a request, and perhaps a surrender. Whatever happened next, she had made her decision. Katherine Carter was through with being a victim. Xavier Morrison spotted the red cloth from half a mile away, its bright color a sharp contrast against the snow-covered cabin. He adjusted his hat against the bright midday sun and urged his horse forward, the pack horse behind him laden with supplies. He'd spent the morning wondering if the woman would take his advice, or if she'd continue fleeing from whatever or whoever had put that haunted look in her eyes. The state of her when he'd found her told a story of desperation. Torn dress, blood-stained sleeves, and the unmistakable wariness of someone who expected a blow rather than a helping hand. Xavier had seen enough of the world's cruelty to recognize its aftermath in others. 8 years as a Union soldier during the war, followed by 5 years driving cattle across increasingly civilized territories, had taught him that people's darkest moments often came at the hands of those they should have been able to trust. He approached the cabin slowly, making enough noise to ensure she'd hear him coming. The last thing he wanted was to startle a frightened woman in a cabin with a loaded rifle. When he was about 50 yards out, he called, "Hello, the cabin. Xavier Morrison, bringing supplies as promised." There was a long moment of silence before the door cracked open. She stood half-hidden behind it, barely recognizable from the night before. She'd cleaned up, her face no longer smeared with dirt, and she was swimming in what appeared to be Jacob's old clothes. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing sharp cheekbones and wary green eyes. "That's far enough," she said, her voice steadier than it had been the previous night. Xavier stopped immediately and raised both hands to show they were empty. "I've brought food, medical supplies, and some proper clothes that might fit better." He nodded toward the pack horse. "Mind if I unload them?" She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Leave them by the woodpile." "Yes, madam." He dismounted and began unloading the supplies, maintaining a respectful distance from the cabin. "There's fresh bread from Mrs. Holloway at the general store in White Pine. Some dried beef, beans, coffee, sugar. A few potatoes and carrots that'll keep if you store them right." He set each item carefully on the ground. "And some bandages and salve. Figured you might need those." Her eyes narrowed. "Why are you doing this?" Xavier paused, considering his answer. "Because somebody once did the same for me when I needed it most." He finished unloading the supplies, then straightened. "I don't know what brought you here, and I won't ask, but nobody should freeze or starve in these mountains if I can help it." "I can't pay you," she said bluntly. "Didn't ask for payment." He adjusted his hat. "Though I'd appreciate knowing what to call you if you're inclined to share." Again, that long, evaluating pause. "Katherine," she finally said. "Katherine Carter. Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Carter." He didn't offer his hand, keeping a respectful distance. "I run the Twisted M about 20 miles west of here. If you need anything, hang that red cloth again. I ride this way every few days to check the passes. And when the owner of this cabin returns, Jacob won't be back until spring thaw at the earliest. His sister had a baby back in Ohio, and he went to meet his new nephew." Xavier glanced at the cabin. He'd be pleased to know his place is being looked after. Catherine's posture remained rigid, her hand still hidden behind the door where Xavier suspected she held a weapon of some kind. "Smart woman. I'll be going now," he said, mounting his horse. "Unless there's anything else you need." She shook her head, then hesitated. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." "Xavier," he corrected gently. "Mr. Morrison was my father, and he was a mean old cuss no one misses much." The ghost of a smile flickered across her face before disappearing. "Thank you, Xavier." He tipped his hat and turned his horse, riding away without looking back. The woman Katherine clearly valued her privacy, and he'd respect that. But as he made his way back toward his ranch, Xavier found himself thinking about those green eyes and the strength it must have taken for her to survive whatever had driven her to these mountains. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Katherine finally released her white-knuckled grip on the kitchen knife she'd been holding behind the door. She moved cautiously to the woodpile, half expecting Xavier to reappear, but the trail remained empty except for the tracks left by his horses. The supplies were more generous than she'd anticipated. In addition to the food he'd mentioned, there was a bundle of women's clothing, simple but sturdy items that looked roughly her size, along with soap, a hairbrush, and a small bottle of rose water. The thoughtfulness of these additions brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Katherine carried everything inside, barred the door, and spent the next hour organizing her newfound treasures. The clothing was especially precious. A navy blue wool skirt, 2 cotton blouses, warm undergarments, thick stockings, and a knitted shawl. There was even a pair of boots that, while slightly large, were infinitely better than her ruined slippers. As she changed into clothes that actually fit, Katherine caught a glimpse of herself in the small shaving mirror on the shelf. The woman staring back was a stranger, hollowed cheeks, dark circles under her eyes, a fading yellowish bruise along her jawline. But beneath the physical evidence of her ordeal, there was something new in her expression, a hardness that hadn't been there before, and perhaps the faintest spark of hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm Katherine established for herself. Each morning she woke at dawn, built up the fire, and prepared a small breakfast. She rationed the supplies carefully, unsure how long she would need to hide in the mountains. The snow had melted enough that the main trails were passable, but Katherine remained at the cabin, venturing no further than the small creek 50 yards away for fresh water. During the days, she kept herself busy with chores, cleaning the already immaculate cabin, chopping kindling from the smaller logs, practicing with the rifle until she felt confident she could use it if necessary. At night, she read from the small collection of books on the shelf, mostly practical guides to surviving in the wilderness, but also a worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans that transported her away from her troubles for a few hours at a time. The red bandana remained tucked away. Katherine told herself she was being prudent with the supplies, making them last as long as possible. But in truth, she was reluctant to summon Xavier Morrison again. His kindness was unsettling precisely because it asked nothing in return. It was far easier to understand cruelty. Katherine had become an expert in anticipating the next blow, the next cutting remark. Genuine goodness was foreign territory, filled with uncertainty. On the 15th day, as Katherine was returning from the creek with a bucket of water, she spotted a rider approaching from the east, not from the direction of White Pine or Xavier's ranch. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she dropped the bucket and raced for the cabin, reaching the rifle just as the rider came into clear view. It wasn't Xavier. This man was older, with a weathered face partially hidden by a gray beard. He rode directly to the cabin door without calling out, his gaze sweeping the area with the practiced scrutiny of a hunter or a lawman. Katherine's hands trembled as she raised the rifle, pressing it against her shoulder the way she'd practiced. Through the window, she watched as the man dismounted and approached the door. "Hello," he called, knocking firmly. "Anyone home?" Katherine remained silent, praying he would assume the cabin was empty and leave. Instead, he tried the door handle, frowning when he found it barred. "Strange," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. He stepped back, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the cabin more carefully. Jacob wouldn't leave his place barred up like this. The man reached inside his coat, and Katherine's finger tightened on the trigger. But instead of a weapon, he produced a piece of paper, which he examined briefly before tucking it away again. "I know someone's in there," he called, his voice taking on an authoritative tone. "I'm Deputy Marshal Holden from Silverwater. I'm looking for Katherine Carter, wanted for questioning in the death of her husband." Katherine's blood turned to ice. They had tracked her. Vernon's business partner must have realized what had happened and alerted the authorities. Her mind raced, calculating options that dwindled with each passing second. "Mrs. Carter," the marshal continued, "if you're in there, I suggest you come out peacefully. There's nowhere to run in these mountains." Katherine backed away from the window, her thoughts spinning. If she surrendered, she would hang. Vernon's influence in Silverwater extended even beyond his death. His friends owned the newspaper. His cousin was the judge. No one would believe that proper, charming Vernon Blackburn had been a monster behind closed doors. No one would care that she had acted in self-defense. A crash from the front of the cabin shattered her thoughts. The marshal was attempting to break down the door. Katherine raised the rifle again, desperation overwhelming her as the wood began to splinter. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered until they were accompanied by a shout. "Marshal Holden, what brings you to this side of the range?" Xavier Morrison's voice cut through Katherine's panic like a knife. She shifted position to see through another window and spotted him riding hard toward the cabin, his expression pleasant but his posture alert. The marshal stepped away from the door, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "Morrison, I might ask you the same question." Xavier dismounted smoothly, his movements casual but purposeful as he positioned himself between the marshal and the cabin door. "I check on Jacob's place while he's back east, part of my regular route." He gestured toward the packhorse behind him, bringing up some supplies. Holden's eyes narrowed. "You've been out here recently, every week or so." Xavier's voice remained even, but Katherine saw the tension in his shoulders. "Why? Something wrong? I'm tracking a fugitive." Holden produced a wanted poster and held it up. Even from her position, Katherine could make out her own face sketched in harsh lines, looking far more sinister than she'd ever appeared in life. "Katherine Carter murdered her husband in Silverwater about 3 weeks back. Trail led this way." Xavier studied the poster with what appeared to be mild interest. "Can't say I've seen her. Pretty woman, though. What's her story?" Bashed her husband's head in while he slept, then ran with whatever valuables she could carry, Holden said with disgust. Vernon Blackburn was one of Silverwater's most respected citizens, owned half the businesses in town. Catherine's hands tightened around the rifle. The lie about Vernon being asleep made her blood boil, but it confirmed her worst fears. No one would believe the truth. "Sounds like a dangerous woman," Xavier commented, folding his arms. "You sure she came this way? Not many folks pass through these parts, especially not a woman alone." Holden looked unconvinced. "Got a witness saw a woman matching her description on the eastern trail out of Silverwater. Been tracking her since, checking every settlement and cabin." He gestured toward the door. "Mind if I have a look inside, just to be thorough?" Catherine's heart stopped. She retreated further into the shadows, knowing the rifle would be useless against a lawman. If he entered, she was finished. "Actually," Xavier said, his tone suddenly much less friendly, "I do mind. Jacob entrusted his property to me while he's gone, and I take that responsibility seriously." He stepped closer to Holden. "You got a warrant to search private property, Marshal." The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. "Don't need a warrant to pursue a fugitive," Holden said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Maybe not in Silverwater," Xavier agreed, "but this is White Pine County, not your jurisdiction. You want to search this cabin, you'll need to ride into White Pine, talk to Sheriff Thompson, and get him to ride back out here with you." He smiled thinly. "Course, with another storm coming in, that might take a few days." Holden glanced at the sky, where dark clouds were indeed gathering on the horizon. "You're interfering with a manhunt, Morrison." "No, sir. I'm protecting my friend's property from an unlawful search." Xavier didn't back down. "You're welcome to come back with the proper authority." For a tense moment, Katherine thought the marshal might draw his weapon. Instead, he spat on the ground, crumpled the wanted poster, and tossed it aside. "I'll be back," he promised, mounting his horse. "And if I find out you've been harboring a murderer, you'll hang right alongside her." "Safe travels, Marshal," Xavier replied calmly. Katherine watched, barely breathing, as Holden rode away, frequently looking back until he disappeared around a bend in the trail. Only then did Xavier's shoulders relax. He picked up the discarded wanted poster, smoothed it out, and approached the cabin door. "Katherine," he called softly. "It's Xavier. He's gone, but not for long. We need to talk." She unbarred the door with shaking hands, still clutching the rifle. Xavier entered cautiously, his eyes going immediately to the weapon. "You won't need that with me," he said gently. "Did you know?" she demanded, not lowering the rifle. "Is that why you helped me? Because you knew who I was?" Xavier shook his head. "I had no idea until today." He held up the wanted poster. "This doesn't match the story written on your face when I found you." Catherine's resolve wavered. "What do you mean?" "I've seen enough of violence to recognize its marks," Xavier said simply. "The way you flinched when I approached, the blood on your sleeve, the terror in your eyes." He set the poster on the table. "That's not the look of a cold-blooded killer. That's the look of someone who's been surviving hell for a long time." The rifle grew unbearably heavy in Catherine's hands. She lowered it slowly, tears blurring her vision. "He wasn't asleep," she whispered. "He had a knife. He was going to kill me." Xavier nodded, not with pity but with understanding. "I believe you." Those three simple words broke something inside her. Katherine sank into a chair, the rifle clattering to the floor as sobs tore through her body. Years of fear, pain, and forced silence poured out in a torrent she couldn't control. Through it all, Xavier stood quietly by the door, giving her the space to fall apart without judgment. When she finally regained some composure, he spoke softly. "Holden will be back, and he won't be alone next time. You can't stay here." Katherine wiped her face with trembling hands. "Where can I go? They'll hang me if they find me." "Not if they can't find you." Xavier crossed to the window, checking the trail. "Pack whatever you can carry. We leave in 10 minutes. His blue eyes met hers, resolute and calm. "I'm not in the habit of abandoning people who need help, especially not to men like Holden." "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Katherine asked, bewilderment replacing her tears. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." He moved toward the door. "I'll saddle the horses. 10 minutes, Katherine." As he stepped outside, Katherine remained frozen, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. Then, galvanized by the urgency in Xavier's voice, she began gathering her few belongings. 8 minutes later, she emerged from the cabin wearing the blue wool skirt, a warm blouse, and the 2 large boots, now stuffed with rags to make them fit better. She carried a small bundle containing the rest of her clothes and the food that would travel well. Xavier had 3 horses ready, his own mount, the pack horse now with different supplies and a smaller bay mare with a side saddle. "Can you ride?" he asked, taking her bundle and securing it to the pack horse. "Yes," Katherine replied. Growing up on her father's small farm in Pennsylvania, she had ridden since childhood, though Vernon had forbidden it after their marriage, considering it unladylike. "Good." Xavier offered his hand to help her mount. "We're heading west, over the pass before the storm hits. If we push hard, we can reach my ranch by nightfall." Katherine hesitated before taking his hand. "Your ranch? But won't that be the first place they look for me?" "Eventually," he agreed. "But not tonight. Tonight they'll be searching every cabin and camp between here and White Pine." He helped her into the saddle. "My ranch is remote with good vantage points. We'll see anyone coming long before they reach us." "And then what?" Katherine adjusted her skirt, the familiar feel of a horse beneath her both strange and comforting after so long. "Then we figure out how to clear your name." Xavier mounted his own horse. "Or get you somewhere they'll never find you." As they rode away from the cabin, Katherine glanced back one final time at the place that had been her sanctuary for 2 precious weeks. Ahead lay nothing but uncertainty, but for the first time since she'd fled Silverwater, she wasn't facing it alone. The storm caught them halfway through the mountain pass, turning what should have been a 6-hour journey into a grueling test of endurance. Sleet drove horizontally, stinging their faces and making the narrow trail treacherously slick. Xavier led the way, occasionally dismounting to guide the horses through particularly dangerous sections where the path dropped away sharply on one side. Katherine's fingers grew numb despite her gloves, and her face burned from the cold. Yet she didn't complain, keeping pace with Xavier and following his instructions precisely. After years of having her every movement controlled and criticized, the simple act of being trusted to handle herself was oddly empowering. "Not much further," Xavier called back to her as they crested a ridge. The wind nearly stole his words, but Katherine nodded her understanding. True to his word, within the hour the landscape began to change. The narrow mountain trail widened into a sloping meadow, now covered in snow but clearly part of a larger valley. In the distance, Katherine could make out the dark shapes of buildings: a large main house, a barn, and several smaller outbuildings. "Twisted M," Xavier announced with evident pride as they approached. "Not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it's mine, free and clear." They rode directly to the barn, where Xavier quickly dismounted and helped Katherine down. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, stiff from hours in the saddle. "Let's get the horses settled, then get you inside where it's warm," he said, leading the animals into the shelter of the barn. The interior was blissfully free of wind and noticeably warmer. Lanterns hung from posts cast a golden glow over clean stalls and neatly stacked hay. Xavier efficiently removed the saddles and began rubbing down the horses, showing Katherine how to care for her mare. "You've done well today," he said as they worked. "Most folks from the city wouldn't have managed that trail in good weather. let alone a storm. I grew up on a farm, Katherine explained, her voice rough from the cold. Not a ranch, just a small place in Pennsylvania. We had 2 horses and some dairy cows. The memory of her childhood home, long sold after her parents' deaths, brought a wistful smile to her face. I haven't ridden in years, though. Could have fooled me. Xavier finished with his horse and moved to help her. You've got a natural seat. A loud bark interrupted them, followed by the barn door swinging open to admit a large black and white dog and a young man bundled against the weather. Xavier, thank God you made it back. When the storm hit, the man stopped short at the sight of Katherine, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, confusion, and curiosity. "Oh, hello, madam. Caleb," Xavier said easily. "This is Miss Katherine Carter. She'll be staying with us for a while." He turned to Katherine. "This is Caleb Jenkins, my foreman and the closest thing to a brother I've got." Caleb recovered quickly, removing his hat and offering a respectful nod. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Carter. Welcome to Twisted M." Katherine managed a small smile, though anxiety twisted in her stomach. Another person who knew of her presence meant another potential risk. Xavier seemed to read her thoughts. "Caleb can be trusted completely," he assured her, "and we'll need his help." "Help with what?" Caleb asked, his gaze moving between them. "I'll explain inside," Xavier promised. "For now, let's just say Miss Carter is in some trouble that isn't of her making and she needs a safe place to stay." Understanding dawned on Caleb's face. "Ah, one of those situations." He nodded firmly. "Well, you've come to the right place, Miss Carter. The boss here has a habit of taking in strays." He patted the dog's head affectionately. 2-legged and 4-legged alike. The dog approached Katherine cautiously, sniffing at her skirt before sitting politely at her feet. "That's Scout," Xavier explained. "He's particular about who he likes, but it seems you've passed inspection." Katherine tentatively reached down to stroke the dog's head, earning a gentle thump of his tail against the barn floor. The simple, uncomplicated acceptance brought a lump to her throat. "Let's get inside," Caleb suggested, noticing her exhaustion. "Mrs. Winters will have supper waiting, and she'll fuss something fierce if we let it get cold." "Mrs. Winters?" Katherine questioned as they left the barn, heading toward the main house. "Our housekeeper and cook," Xavier explained, taking her elbow to steady her as they crossed the snow-covered yard. "She's been with me since I bought the place 5 years ago, widowed during the war. Her husband served in my regiment." Katherine tensed at the mention of another person who would know of her presence, but she was too tired to properly worry. The journey had drained her last reserves of strength, and only stubborn pride kept her moving forward. The main house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, a 2-story structure built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Warm light spilled from the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. As they stepped inside, the scent of beef stew and freshly baked bread enveloped them. The entryway opened into a spacious main room dominated by a massive stone fireplace where logs crackled merrily. Comfortable furniture was arranged to take advantage of the warmth, and bookshelves lined one wall, filled with more volumes than Katherine had seen outside a proper library. A small, round woman with silver-streaked dark hair bustled in from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her welcoming smile faltered slightly at the sight of Katherine, but recovered quickly. "Xavier Morrison, cutting it mighty close with that storm," she scolded, though her tone held more relief than anger. Her sharp eyes took in Katherine's bedraggled appearance. "And bringing company without a word of warning." "Sorry, Agatha," Xavier said, helping Katherine remove her wet coat. "It was rather unexpected. This is Miss Katherine Carter. She'll be staying with us for a time." Mrs. Winters assessed Katherine with a knowing look that suggested she'd seen similar situations before. "Well, you look half frozen and completely exhausted, my dear. Let's get you warmed up and fed before anything else." Without waiting for a response, she took Katherine by the arm and led her toward the stairs. "I'll draw you a hot bath and find you some dry clothes. The men can wait for their explanations." Katherine glanced back at Xavier, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on. You're safe here. We'll talk after you've rested." Too weary to argue, Katherine allowed herself to be guided upstairs to a bedroom that was simply but comfortably furnished. A large bed with a colorful quilt dominated the space, flanked by a dresser and a small writing desk beneath a window that would overlook the valley in daylight. This was Xavier's mother's room before she passed, Mrs. Winters explained as she bustled about, lighting lamps and retrieving towels from a chest. "He keeps it ready for guests, though the Lord knows we don't get many out here." She disappeared briefly and returned with several young ranch hands who carried in a copper bathtub and buckets of steaming water. They worked quickly and efficiently, carefully averting their eyes from Katherine, before retreating with respectful nods. Once the bath was ready, Mrs. Winters laid out a simple nightgown and robe. "These belong to my daughter. She's about your size, I'd wager. She lives in Denver now, married to a shopkeeper." Pride colored her voice. "Rest as long as you need. I'll bring up some food when you're ready." Left alone, Katherine sank gratefully into the hot bath, allowing the warmth to seep into her bones. As she washed away the grime of travel, she tried to make sense of her situation. In the span of 24 hours, she had gone from relative safety in the mountain cabin to being hunted by a marshal, to finding refuge on the ranch of a man she barely knew. Xavier Morrison remained a mystery. His kindness seemed genuine, his offer of protection sincere. Yet experience had taught Katherine that men's motives were rarely as straightforward as they appeared. Vernon had seemed kind once, too charming and attentive during their brief courtship, revealing his true nature only after the wedding vows were spoken. Still, something about Xavier's steady gaze and quiet confidence inspired trust despite her reservations. He had risked himself to help her, first at the cabin and then by bringing her to his home. Whatever his reasons, she owed him her life. After the bath, Katherine dressed in the borrowed nightclothes and sat on the edge of the bed, combing through her damp hair with her fingers. A soft knock at the door announced Mrs. Winters, who entered bearing a tray laden with stew, bread, and a cup of steaming tea. "You look better already," the housekeeper observed, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "Though still too thin, we'll have to remedy that." Katherine smiled weakly. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Winters. Agatha, please." The older woman pulled up a chair. "And I recognize a soul in need when I see one." Her expression grew serious. "Xavier told me enough to understand you're in some trouble. He didn't share details and I won't ask for them, but you should know that if he's taken up your cause, you're in good hands. You seem very certain of that." Agatha's eyes softened with memory. "My William died at Antietam. Xavier was his lieutenant. When the battle was over, Xavier carried William's body back through enemy fire, just so I could bury my husband properly." She patted Katherine's hand. "He's a good man with a strong sense of justice. If he believes in you, there's good reason." The simple testimony eased something in Katherine's chest. "I've not known many good men," she admitted softly. "No, I expect you haven't." Agatha stood, her expression compassionate but not pitying. "Eat, then sleep. Tomorrow will be soon enough for decisions." After the housekeeper left, Katherine ate ravenously, the simple fare tasting better than any elaborate meal Vernon had ever provided. When she finally crawled beneath the quilt, exhaustion claimed her immediately. pulling her into the deepest sleep she'd known since fleeing Silverwater. Katherine woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sounds of activity from the ranch yard below. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was, panic rising until memory returned the marshal, the desperate flight, Xavier's ranch. A knock at the door preceded Agatha entering with a tray of breakfast and a bundle of clothing. "Good morning, my dear. You've slept nearly 14 hours straight." 14 hours, Katherine sat up, alarmed. "I never meant to, you needed it," Agatha interrupted firmly, setting down the tray. "Your body knows what it needs better than your mind sometimes." She laid out the clothing, a simple dark green skirt, white blouse, and warm cardigan. "These should fit well enough. Xavier asked if you join him in his study when you're ready." "No rush." After Agatha left, Katherine ate quickly and dressed in the borrowed clothes, which fit surprisingly well. She found a brush on the dresser and tamed her hair into a simple braid, studying her reflection in the mirror. Color had returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes had receded somewhat. She still appeared too thin, with shadows beneath her eyes, but no longer like a woman on the verge of collapse. Following Agatha's directions, Katherine made her way downstairs and to the east wing of the house, where she found Xavier in a book-lined study. Large windows overlooked the snow-covered ranch lands, where men on horseback moved cattle toward a sheltered valley. Xavier stood at the window watching the operation but turned when she entered. "Good morning," he greeted her. "You look better." "I feel better," Katherine admitted. "Thank you for everything." Xavier gestured to a chair near the fireplace. "Please sit. We need to talk about what happens next." Katherine settled into the chair, noting the spread of papers on the desk nearby, including the wanted poster with her face on it. "You said something about clearing my name." "Yes." Xavier took the seat opposite her. "I've been thinking about your situation. The fact is, Holden's not likely to give up the hunt. Men like him take failure personally." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We have two options. You can run head west to California or Oregon, change your name, start fresh, or you can fight. Fight how? It would be my word against Vernon's reputation. In Silverwater, that's no contest." "Perhaps." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "But what if we could find others? Women Vernon might have hurt before you. Business associates he cheated. Anyone who saw his true nature." Katherine considered this. Vernon had been careful to maintain his public persona, but there had been moments, a business partner who suddenly dissolved their arrangement, a maid who quit without notice after Vernon cornered her in the pantry. Small cracks in his perfect facade that might, together, reveal the monster beneath. "Even if such people exist," she said carefully, "why would they come forward now? They didn't when I needed them before." "Because now there's a dead body and a woman facing the gallows," Xavier replied bluntly. "That has a way of clarifying moral choices for people." Katherine twisted her hands in her lap. It would mean going back to Silverwater. Eventually, yes, but not alone. Xavier's blue eyes held her steadily. "I have some influence in this territory, Katherine, friends in positions that matter. If we build a strong enough case, we might be able to arrange a fair hearing." The prospect was both terrifying and tantalizing, to be free not just from physical pursuit but from the shadow of guilt that had followed her since that night. To reclaim her name and perhaps even her dignity. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he first offered her the blanket on that cold night. "You're risking everything, your reputation, your ranch, possibly your life. For a stranger." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "I spent 4 years fighting a war that was supposed to be about freedom and justice. Came home to find those ideals don't apply equally to everyone." His voice carried the weight of old disappointments. "I can't fix all the world's injustices, but I can't ignore the ones right in front of me either." He stood, moving to the desk to shuffle through some papers. "Besides, you're not a stranger anymore, and I'm a fair judge of character." He looked up with the hint of a smile. "I don't think you're a cold-blooded killer, Katherine Carter. I think you're a survivor." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes at his simple faith in her. "What if you're wrong?" "I'm not." His confidence was unshakable. "But even if I were, which I'm not, everyone deserves a fair chance to tell their story." He handed her several sheets of paper. "I need you to write down everything. Your marriage to Vernon, the abuse, that final night. Every detail you can remember, no matter how small or shameful it seems. Names of anyone who might have suspected or known. Servants, neighbors, friends." Katherine took the papers with trembling hands. "And then?" "Then Caleb and I will start making discreet inquiries. I have a friend who practices law in Denver who owes me a favor. And Sheriff Thompson in White Pine is a reasonable man, unlike Holden." Xavier's expression turned serious. "It won't be easy, Katherine, and it will take time." "Are you willing to try?" Katherine thought of the alternatives: a lifetime looking over her shoulder, living under a false name, always afraid of discovery. Or worse, capture and a swift trial ending at the end of a rope. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll try." Xavier nodded, satisfied. "Good. In the meantime, you'll stay here. The ranch is remote enough that we'll have warning if anyone approaches." He hesitated, then added, "You should know that my men will protect you. They're loyal to me, and if I say you're under my protection, that's all they need to know." The word protection sent a shiver of unease through Katherine. Vernon had used that word too, claiming his controlling behavior was for her protection. Yet everything about Xavier's demeanor suggested a different meaning entirely. His offer came without demands, without the subtle threat that had always underlined Vernon's protection. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll start writing everything down today." "Take your time," Xavier advised, moving toward the door. "Be thorough. I have some ranch business to attend to, but I'll be back by supper." At the threshold, he paused. "Katherine, you're not alone in this anymore. Remember that." After he left, Katherine stared at the blank pages before her. Writing her story meant reliving it, every humiliation, every blow, every moment of terror. But Xavier was right. If she wanted freedom, real freedom, she would need to face her past before she could claim her future. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the pen and began to write. The next 2 weeks established a routine at the Twisted M. Katherine spent her mornings helping Agatha with household tasks, grateful for the physical activity that kept her mind occupied. In the afternoons, she continued working on her account of life with Vernon, the painful memories flowing easier with each passing day. Sometimes Xavier would join her in the study, asking gentle but probing questions that helped her recall details she had suppressed. In the evenings, they gathered in the main room, Xavier, Caleb, Agatha, and Katherine sharing meals and conversation that gradually became more comfortable. Katherine found herself laughing for the first time in years at Caleb's outrageous stories of cattle drives and frontier mishaps. Sometimes Xavier would read aloud from his extensive library, his deep voice bringing classics and new works alike to life. Throughout it all, Scout remained Katherine's constant shadow, the dog seemingly having appointed himself her personal guardian. His warm presence beside her chair, or at her feet, became a comfort she hadn't known she needed. The ranch itself was impressive: over 10,000 acres of grazing land, managed by Xavier with a modern approach that balanced profit with stewardship of the land. He employed 15 men year-round, more during seasonal roundups, and treated them all with respect that earned him fierce loyalty in return. As Catherine's strength returned, she began venturing outside more, first just to the porch where she could watch the daily activities of the ranch, then gradually further afield. Xavier taught her to shoot properly with a small revolver better suited to her hands than Jacob's hunting rifle had been. She practiced daily until she could hit targets consistently at 20 paces. Good, Xavier approved after a particularly successful session. You're a natural. I never thought I'd say this, but I actually enjoy it, Katherine admitted, carefully unloading the revolver as he taught her. There's something empowering about knowing I can defend myself. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's exactly what it should be. A tool, not for aggression, but for confidence and security. On her 18th day at the ranch, Katherine was helping Agatha prepare dinner when Caleb burst through the door, his expression urgent. "Riders coming," he announced without preamble. 6 men, including Marshal Holden. Xavier appeared from his study, already buckling on his gun belt. "How far out?" 20 minutes, maybe less. They're pushing hard." Catherine's blood ran cold. "He found me." "We don't know that," Xavier cautioned, though his expression was grim. "Could be routine." "Holden's been checking every ranch in the territory." "With 6 men," Caleb raised a skeptical eyebrow. "That's not routine." Xavier turned to Katherine. "Either way, we can't risk it. There's a line shack about 5 miles north near the creek, well hidden, stocked with provisions." He glanced at Agatha. "Get her some food and warm clothes." The housekeeper nodded and hurried to the pantry while Xavier continued. "Caleb, saddle Dancer, she's the quietest mount we've got. Use the north trail through the pines. It won't show tracks if they bring a tracker." Katherine found her voice. "I can't keep running. If I leave now, I'm admitting guilt. If you stay, you might not get the chance to prove your innocence," Xavier countered firmly. "Katherine, we need more time. My friend in Denver is still gathering information." "We're close, but not close enough yet." He crossed to her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Trust me, please." Something in his eyes, a warmth that had been growing between them over the past weeks, made the decision for her. "All right, but promise me you won't do anything foolish." "These men are dangerous." "I'm more dangerous when provoked," Xavier replied with a grim smile. He released her hands and moved to a cabinet near the fireplace, removing a small leather-bound book. "Take this. It's a journal of our findings so far. Names of people willing to testify about Vernon's character, business dealings that were less than honest, even a previous wife who left the territory rather than endure his affection." Katherine took the journal, hope flaring. "You found all this already. Like I said, we're close." Xavier's expression softened. "Now go, quickly. Stay at the line shack until Caleb or I come for you. No one else, understand? Not even if they claim I sent them." 15 minutes later, Katherine was riding north through a dense pine forest, the mare picking her way carefully through underbrush. The saddlebags contained food, extra ammunition for the revolver now holstered at her hip, and warm clothing. The journal was tucked securely inside her coat. As she reached the crest of a hill, Katherine paused to look back at the ranch, now a collection of small buildings in the distance. A group of riders was just arriving at the main house. Even from this distance, she recognized Marshal Holden's distinctive posture. Anxiety clutched at her heart. Xavier was intelligent and capable, but Holden had the law on his side. If the marshal had decided, Xavier was harboring her. "He'll be fine," she whispered to the horse, as much to convince herself as anything. "He knows what he's doing." With a final glance at the ranch, Katherine turned the mare north and continued toward the line shack, praying that Xavier's confidence wasn't misplaced. The line shack was well hidden, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by pines and backing up to a rocky hillside. It was more substantial than Katherine had expected, a solidly built one-room cabin with a small stable attached to one side. Inside was basic but comfortable, with a bed, table, chairs, and a cast iron stove that would provide both heat and cooking capabilities. Katherine tended to the mare first, ensuring she was fed and comfortable in the stable before bringing her own belongings inside. As Xavier had promised, the cabin was well stocked with provisions, firewood, and even a few books on a small shelf. Once the fire was going and the cabin began to warm, Katherine paced restlessly, unable to settle. The rational part of her mind knew there was nothing to do but wait. Yet anxiety drove her to check and recheck the revolver, to scan the tree line through the single window, to listen intently for any sound beyond the normal forest noises. As darkness fell, her worry for Xavier intensified. What if Holden had arrested him? What if there had been violence? The idea of Xavier being harmed because of her was unbearable. Katherine forced herself to breathe deeply, to focus on practical matters. She prepared a simple meal from the provisions, though she had little appetite. She read a few pages from one of the books, a collection of Ralph Waldo Emerson's essays, but couldn't concentrate. Finally, she opened the journal Xavier had given her. His handwriting was neat and precise, the entries methodical. He had indeed been thorough, documenting conversations with former business associates of Vernon's, servants who had worked in their home, even the previous Mrs. Blackburn, now living under her maiden name in Wyoming. The picture that emerged was damning. Vernon Blackburn had been not only abusive to Katherine, but dishonest in his business dealings, manipulative of those around him, and skilled at presenting a false face to the world. Xavier had assembled a compelling case that Vernon had been exactly the monster Katherine knew him to be. Most surprising were the last few entries, which mentioned Sheriff Thompson of White Pine. According to Xavier's notes, the sheriff had expressed doubts about Marshal Holden's version of events and was willing to consider alternative explanations if presented with sufficient evidence. Hope kindled in Katherine's chest. Perhaps Xavier was right. Perhaps she could clear her name and reclaim her life, not as Vernon Blackburn's widow, but as Katherine Carter in her own right. A sudden noise outside jolted her from her thoughts. Katherine extinguished the lamp and moved to the window, peering cautiously into the darkness. The moon provided enough light to make out a figure approaching on horseback. Her hand went to the revolver at her hip, drawing it smoothly as Xavier had taught her. The rider came closer, and relief flooded through her as she recognized Caleb's lanky form. She opened the door as he dismounted. "What happened?" she demanded, holstering the weapon. Caleb removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. Holden and his men searched the ranch, turned the place upside down. His expression was a mixture of anger and grudging admiration. Xavier played it cool, acted offended at the intrusion but cooperative, even invited Holden to stay for dinner. And did they find anything? Nothing. Xavier had Agatha remove anything of yours days ago, just in case. Caleb accepted the cup of coffee she offered him. They left about an hour ago, heading back toward White Pine. And Xavier, that's why I'm here. Caleb's expression grew serious. He rode out right after they left to White Pine. Said to tell you he's meeting with Sheriff Thompson and his lawyer friend from Denver. He thinks it's time to make a move. Katherine sank into a chair. What kind of move? The kind that ends this one way or another. Caleb leaned forward. Xavier believes he has enough evidence to convince Thompson to override Holden's warrant and grant you a proper hearing. The lawyer Edwards is his name, seems to think there's a solid case for self-defense. When will he return? 2 days, maybe 3. Caleb studied her face. He asked me to stay with you if that's all right. The ranch hands can manage without me for a while. Katherine nodded, grateful for the company despite her disappointment that it wasn't Xavier himself. "Of course. Thank you, Caleb." The young foreman grinned. "Besides, I promised the boss I'd work on your riding skills. If things go well, you might need to be able to handle more than that gentle mare out there." The next 2 days passed slowly, despite Caleb's efforts to keep Catherine's spirits up with riding lessons, target practice, and tales of his and Xavier's adventures establishing the Twisted M. On the morning of the third day, as they were returning from checking a nearby stream for fish, they spotted a rider approaching from the south. "It's Xavier," Caleb confirmed, shading his eyes against the morning sun. Catherine's heart leapt at the sight of him. Over the weeks at the ranch, her feelings for Xavier had evolved from cautious gratitude to genuine affection, and something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. His steady presence, quiet strength, and unwavering support had become essential to her, though she had never spoken of these feelings aloud. As he drew closer, Katherine searched his expression for some indication of news, good or bad. His face gave nothing away until he dismounted and approached them, removing his hat. "It's done," he said simply. "Sheriff Thompson has rescinded Holden's warrant and issued a summons instead. You're to appear before Judge Whitaker in White Pine next week for a hearing, not a trial, a hearing to determine if there's sufficient evidence to proceed with charges." Katherine barely dared to hope. "And is there sufficient evidence?" A slow smile spread across Xavier's face. "Not according to our friend Edwards. He's convinced the judge will dismiss the case entirely once he reviews the evidence we've gathered." He reached into his saddlebag and produced an official-looking document. "This is a guarantee of safe passage to and from White Pine for the hearing. Thompson's signature and seal. You can't be arrested while this is in effect." Katherine took the paper with trembling hands, scanning the legal language that promised her temporary freedom. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Xavier's eyes held hers. "Just be ready to tell your story, exactly as you told it to me. The truth is powerful, Katherine, more powerful than Vernon Blackburn's reputation." Caleb cleared his throat. "I'll see to the horses," he said tactfully, leading both mounts toward the stable and leaving Katherine and Xavier alone. "Thank you," Katherine said softly when Caleb was out of earshot, "for believing in me, for risking so much." Xavier took a step closer. "I didn't do it out of charity, Katherine." "Then why did you do it?" she asked, her pulse quickening at his proximity. "Because from the moment I found you on that trail, something told me you were worth fighting for." His voice dropped lower. "And everything I've learned about you since has only confirmed that." Katherine searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his clear blue eyes. "I've been afraid to trust again," she admitted. "Vernon made me doubt my own judgment. I know." Xavier didn't move to touch her, respecting the space between them. "And I'll wait as long as it takes for you to feel safe. But I want you to know that whatever happens in White Pine, you have a place at the Twisted M if you want it." The simple declaration, not a demand, not even truly a proposal, but an open door to a future she might choose, brought tears to Katherine's eyes. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. For the first time since she'd known him, Xavier's composure wavered, relief and something like joy transforming his usually stoic expression. He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "Then let's get through this hearing," he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm, "and come home." The journey to White Pine took most of a day, with Katherine riding between Xavier and Caleb, Scout trotting faithfully alongside. They avoided the main trails, taking a more circuitous route that Xavier assured her was safer, though it added hours to their travel time. White Pine proved to be larger than Katherine had expected. A growing town with a proper main street lined with businesses, a church with a white steeple, and an impressive two-story courthouse at the center of town. Unlike Silverwater, which had grown wealthy from mining and lumber operations, White Pine appeared to be primarily a ranching community, with cattle pens visible on the outskirts and cowboys evident among the townspeople. They arrived late in the afternoon, riding directly to a modest hotel at the edge of town. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted Xavier with obvious respect. "Mr. Morrison, good to see you. Your rooms are ready as requested. One for the lady, adjoining rooms for you gentlemen." He handed over keys without requesting payment, suggesting arrangements had been made in advance. Xavier thanked him, then turned to Katherine. "The hearing is at 10 tomorrow morning. Edwards will meet us for dinner in an hour to go over what to expect." In her room, simple but clean, with a real bed and washstand, Katherine changed into one of the dresses Agatha had altered for her. As she pinned her hair into a simple but neat arrangement, she studied her reflection. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the terrified fugitive of 2 months ago. There was color in her cheeks, a steadiness in her gaze, and if not quite confidence, then at least a quiet determination in her posture. Vernon would not have recognized this woman. More importantly, she barely recognized herself, and that, she realized, was progress. The Katherine who had fled Silverwater had been broken, defined entirely by her fear. This Katherine, while still afraid, was defined by something stronger: hope. A knock at the door announced Xavier, who escorted her downstairs to a private dining room where Caleb and another man awaited. Edwards was older than Katherine had expected, with silver hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, but his handshake was firm, and his eyes sharp with intelligence. "Miss Carter," he greeted her, "a pleasure to meet you at last. Xavier has told me quite a bit about your situation." As they ate, Edwards outlined what would happen the following day. The hearing would be informal by court standards, no jury, just Judge Whittaker listening to evidence from both sides and determining whether a formal trial was warranted. "Marshal Holden will present his case first," Edwards explained. "He has several witnesses from Silverwater who will testify to Vernon Blackburn's sterling character and your alleged motivations for murder." Katherine's stomach tightened. What motivations could they possibly attribute to me? Money, primarily. "The story Holden is promoting is that you killed Vernon for his fortune and planned to flee with a lover." Edward's expression remained professionally neutral. "There is no evidence for this, of course, but it makes for a compelling narrative." "It's absurd," Katherine protested. "I left with nothing but the clothes I was wearing." "Precisely one of the points we will make." Edwards nodded approvingly. "After Holden presents his case, we will present ours. You will testify, as will several others who have agreed to speak about Vernon's true nature." He adjusted his spectacles. "I must warn you, Miss Carter, it will not be pleasant. Holden will cross-examine you and he will not be gentle." "I understand." Katherine straightened her shoulders. "I've endured worse." Edward studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you have. And that resilience will serve you well tomorrow." He gathered his papers. "Get some rest, Miss Carter. Tomorrow will be challenging, but I am cautiously optimistic about our chances." After Edwards departed, Caleb excused himself as well, leaving Katherine and Xavier alone. The tension Katherine had been holding at bay all day suddenly overwhelmed her, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. "Katherine," Xavier moved to her side, concern evident in his expression. "What if I can't do it?" she whispered. "What if I face them all, people who believed in Vernon, who think I'm a cold-blooded killer and I fall apart?" Xavier took her hands in his touch grounding her. "You won't fall apart. Do you know how I know?" She shook her head. "Because I've seen your strength." The woman who survived years of abuse, who had the courage to defend herself when it mattered most, who traveled alone through mountains in October, that woman doesn't fall apart. His voice was gentle but firm. "You'll tell your story, Katherine, and those who matter will believe you." His faith in her was like a lifeline, something solid to cling to in the storm of her doubts. Katherine drew a shaky breath, then nodded. "Thank you." "Always," he promised, and in that single word Katherine heard a future. The courthouse was packed the following morning, curious townspeople filling the benches to witness what had become the most talked-about case in White Pine's recent history. Katherine sat between Xavier and Edwards at a table facing the judge's bench, her back straight despite the weight of stares she could feel boring into her. Marshal Holden, and a man Edwards identified as the prosecutor from Silverwater, occupied the table across the aisle. Holden's gaze was openly hostile when it landed on Katherine, but she forced herself to meet it steadily, refusing to be the one who looked away first. Judge Whittaker proved to be a stern-faced man in his 60s, with bushy white eyebrows and penetrating gray eyes. He called the proceedings to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "This is not a trial," he announced to the crowded room. "This hearing will determine whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed with charges against Katherine Carter in the death of Vernon Blackburn. I expect decorum from everyone present." His gaze swept the room. "Prosecutor Mills, you may begin." What followed was exactly as Edwards had warned. Character witnesses praised Vernon's generosity and upstanding nature. Business associates spoke of his honest dealings. The town doctor from Silverwater described the fatal wound in clinical detail, emphasizing the force required to fracture a skull, so severely implying premeditation rather than self-defense. Throughout it all, Katherine remained outwardly calm, though her hands twisted in her lap beneath the table. When it was Holden's turn to testify, his account painted a damning picture. A devoted husband brutally murdered by his ungrateful wife, who then fled with family heirlooms and cash. "And you found no trace of these alleged stolen items when you apprehended Mrs. Blackburn?" Judge Whittaker asked, using Vernon's name for her. Holden shifted uncomfortably. "We haven't technically apprehended her yet, Your Honor. She was harbored by Mr. Morrison here, who interfered with our lawful pursuit." The judge's bushy eyebrows rose. "I see. And in your search of Mr. Morrison's property, did you find these missing valuables?" "No, Your Honor. But that doesn't mean—" "Thank you, Marshal. That will be all for now." Judge Whittaker turned to Edwards. "Counselor, your witnesses." Edwards rose smoothly. "The defense calls Katherine Carter." Walking to the witness stand felt like crossing an ocean. Katherine focused on Xavier's encouraging nod, drawing strength from his steady presence as she took the oath and settled into the chair. "Miss Carter," Edwards began, "please tell the court about your marriage to Vernon Blackburn." Katherine took a deep breath and began to speak. She described the whirlwind courtship, how charming Vernon had been, how the abuse began subtly after the wedding, isolation from friends, criticism, control over her movements and appearance, how it escalated to physical violence when she failed to conceive a child after the first year. She recounted specific incidents: a broken wrist explained away as a fall downstairs, bruises hidden beneath high-necked dresses, the night Vernon had held her head underwater in the bathtub until she nearly drowned, all because she had spoken to a male shopkeeper without permission. Finally, she described the final night, Vernon's drunken rage, the knife, her desperate struggle, and the sickening moment when the paperweight connected with his skull. "I didn't want to kill him," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that slipped down her cheeks. "I just wanted him to stop, to not kill me." Edwards guided her through a few more questions, establishing that she had fled with only her mother's locket, no money or valuables, and had been surviving alone until Xavier found her near Jacob's cabin. "Thank you, Miss Carter." Edwards nodded respectfully. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Whittaker turned to the prosecution. "Your witness, Mr. Mills." The prosecutor approached with the confident air of a man certain of his position. "Mrs. Blackburn." "I prefer Miss Carter," Katherine interrupted quietly. Mills smiled thinly. "As you wish. Miss Carter, you've painted quite a picture of abuse and terror, yet not one person in Silverwater ever reported seeing Vernon mistreat you. How do you explain that?" "Vernon was careful," Katherine replied evenly. "He never left marks where they would show. And I was ashamed, taught to believe it was my failure as a wife that provoked him." "Convenient," Mills remarked. "No witnesses to this alleged abuse, just your word." He paced before the stand. "Isn't it true that you were disappointed by Vernon's refusal to let you access his fortune? That you resented the modest allowance he provided? Vernon controlled every aspect of my life, including money, but I never wanted his fortune. I wanted freedom. Freedom to be with your lover, perhaps." Katherine's eyes widened. "I had no lover." Mills approached the stand, his expression triumphant. "No. Then how do you explain the testimony of Vernon's valet, who claims to have delivered letters between you and a man he couldn't identify?" "That's not true," Katherine protested, momentarily shaken. "Are you calling Mr. Phillips a liar? A respected servant in the Blackburn household for 15 years. Edwards rose. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Phillips has not testified in this hearing, so his alleged statement is hearsay." "Sustained," Judge Whittaker agreed. "Move on, Mr. Mills." The prosecutor continued his attack, twisting Katherine's words, suggesting contradictions where there were none, attempting to make her appear unstable and vengeful. Through it all, Katherine maintained her composure, answering truthfully even when the questions became personal and humiliating. Finally, Mills returned to his table. No further questions for this imaginative witness. Edwards called their remaining witnesses. First came Hannah Lewis, Vernon's first wife, who had traveled from Wyoming at considerable personal risk. Her testimony mirrored Katherine's in many respects: the charming courtship, the isolation, the escalating abuse. "I was luckier than Miss Carter," Hannah concluded. "I had a brother who believed me and helped me escape before Vernon killed me. I changed my name and fled the territory. I've lived in fear of him finding me ever since." Next came Thomas Wilson, formerly Vernon's business partner, who testified that Vernon had systematically cheated him and other associates, using threats and blackmail to silence complaints. "Vernon Blackburn was respected in Silverwater because people were afraid of him," Wilson stated firmly. "Not because he deserved respect." Their final witness was Eliza Prentice, who had worked as a maid in the Blackburn household during Katherine's first year of marriage. "I saw the bruises," she testified quietly. "On her arms, her back, once around her throat. Mr. Blackburn threatened to have me arrested for theft if I ever spoke of it. Said no one would believe a colored maid over a man like him." She looked directly at Katherine. "I'm sorry I didn't help you, madam. I was afraid." Katherine nodded, understanding all too well the fear Eliza described. When all testimony concluded, Judge Whittaker called a recess to review the evidence. Katherine returned to the defense table, emotionally drained but oddly peaceful. She had told her truth, all of it, in a public forum where Vernon could no longer silence her. "You did well," Edwards assured her. "Very well indeed." Xavier squeezed her hand beneath the table. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. An hour later, Judge Whittaker returned. The courtroom fell silent as he settled behind the bench, arranging papers before him with deliberate movements. Having reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, he began, I find the prosecution's case against Katherine Carter to be fundamentally flawed. The testimony of multiple witnesses establishes a pattern of abuse by Vernon Blackburn that lends credibility to Miss Carter's account of self-defense. Katherine barely breathed, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. Furthermore, the judge continued, the complete absence of stolen property or evidence of a lover undermines the prosecution's proposed motive. He looked directly at Marshal Holden. It appears, Marshal, that your investigation was predisposed to a particular conclusion, to the exclusion of readily available contrary evidence. Holden's face darkened, but he remained silent under the judge's stern gaze. Therefore, Judge Whittaker concluded, I find insufficient evidence to warrant a trial. All charges against Katherine Carter in the death of Vernon Blackburn are hereby dismissed. The gavel came down with finality. For a moment, Katherine couldn't move, couldn't process what had just happened. Then Xavier was helping her to her feet. Edwards was shaking her hand, and Caleb was whooping from the gallery. Relief crashed over her in a wave so powerful her knees nearly buckled. It's over, Xavier murmured, his arm strong around her waist. You're free, Katherine, free. The word echoed in her mind as they made their way through the crowded courthouse, people stepping aside to let them pass. Some faces showed approval, others doubt, but Katherine found she didn't care about their judgment. The only opinion that mattered was that of the law, which had finally, unexpectedly, worked in her favor. Outside, in the bright autumn sunshine, Katherine turned to Edwards. How can I ever thank you? The lawyer smiled. Live well, Miss Carter, that's thanks enough. He shook Xavier's hand. Take care of her, Morrison. I intend to, Xavier replied, his gaze never leaving Katherine's face. As Edwards departed, Katherine became aware of a commotion near the courthouse steps. Marshal Holden was approaching, his face contorted with anger. This isn't over, he spat. Judge Whittaker may be fooled by your act, but I know what you are. That's enough, Holden, Xavier said quietly, stepping between them. And you, Holden turned his fury on Xavier. Harboring a fugitive, interfering with an investigation, your father would be ashamed. Xavier's expression hardened, but his voice remained level. My father taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. I've done that. Now I suggest you return to Silverwater before you say something you'll regret. Holden's hand twitched toward his holster, and for one terrible moment Katherine thought he might draw. Instead, Sheriff Thompson appeared at his side, placing a restraining hand on his arm. The matter's settled, Holden, Thompson said firmly. Go home. Now. With a final venomous glare, Holden stalked away. Thompson watched him go, then turned to Katherine with a respectful nod. Miss Carter, I hope you'll accept my apologies for not investigating this matter more thoroughly from the beginning. Thank you, Sheriff, Katherine replied. Your willingness to reconsider meant everything. Thompson tipped his hat. Safe travels back to the Twisted M. As they mounted their horses for the journey home, Katherine felt lighter than she had in years. The shadow of Vernon Blackburn that had loomed over her for so long was finally beginning to recede, allowing sunlight to reach places in her soul that had been dark for too long. Ready? Xavier asked, his horse falling in beside hers. Katherine looked back at White Pine, then forward to the mountains and the ranch beyond, to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Yes, she said, I'm ready to go home. They reached the Twisted M as the sun was setting, casting long golden rays across the valley. Agatha was waiting on the porch, her anxious expression transforming to joy as she spotted them approaching. Thank the Lord, she exclaimed, hurrying down to meet them. "What happened? No, don't tell me yet. Come inside, you must be exhausted." Over a hearty meal, they recounted the events of the hearing. Agatha alternated between outrage at Holden's tactics and delight at the final verdict. "So it's truly over," she said when they finished. "You're free to begin again." Katherine nodded, still marveling at the reality of it. "Yes. Though I'm not entirely sure what that means yet." "It means whatever you want it to mean," Xavier said quietly. "The future is yours to shape now." That night, after everyone had retired, Katherine found herself unable to sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way downstairs, intending to sit by the dying fire in the main room. Instead, she found Xavier already there, gazing thoughtfully into the embers. He looked up as she entered. "Couldn't sleep." "Too many thoughts," she admitted, settling into the chair opposite his. "Good thoughts, but overwhelming." "I understand." He poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "When I came back from the war, I couldn't sleep for months, too accustomed to danger, to being on alert. It takes time for the mind to accept that safety is real." Katherine studied his profile in the firelight. "Is that why you helped me? Because you understand what it's like to feel unsafe?" Xavier considered her question. "Partly, perhaps, but mostly." He met her gaze. "Mostly because from the moment I saw you on that trail, something in me recognized something in you. A kind of kinship. I can't explain it better than that." "I felt it too," Katherine admitted softly. "Even when I was terrified and suspicious, something told me you were different. That I could trust you." She looked down at her hands. "I've been afraid to acknowledge it after being so wrong about Vernon." "Vernon was a skilled deceiver. Your judgment wasn't flawed. You were deliberately misled." Xavier leaned forward. "Katherine, I want you to stay. Not out of obligation or because you have nowhere else to go, but because I believe we could build something good together." Katherine's heart quickened. "Are you proposing, Xavier Morrison?" "Not yet." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "That will come when you're ready, when you're certain of your feelings and your freedom. For now, I'm just asking if you'll consider making the Twisted M your home and allowing me to court you properly." The consideration in his request, allowing her time, space, and complete autonomy in her decision, was perhaps the most profound expression of respect Katherine had ever experienced. This man, who had risked everything to help her, was now patiently waiting for her to choose him, making it clear he expected nothing in return for his protection. "Yes," she said, the word emerging with surprising ease. "I would like that very much." The smile that transformed Xavier's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He stood and offered his hand, which she took without hesitation. "Then welcome home, Katherine Carter," he said softly, "for as long as you choose to stay." Spring came to the Twisted M in a riot of wildflowers and new calves, the harsh winter giving way to renewal across the valley. Katherine, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, watched as Xavier worked with the new colts in the corral, his movements confident and gentle as he accustomed the young horses to saddles and bridles. The past 6 months had brought changes Katherine could never have anticipated when she fled Silverwater. With her name cleared, she had written to her distant cousin in Pennsylvania, the only family she had left. To her surprise, he had not only responded with warmth, but had also managed her small inheritance from her parents, which Vernon had claimed was lost in bad investments. The modest sum provided Katherine with something she had lacked for years: independence. She had opened an account at the bank in White Pine, rented a small office above the general store, and established herself as a notary public, a skill she had acquired in her youth, assisting her father with his legal correspondence. The work was satisfying. allowing her to use her education while providing a needed service to the growing community. 3 days a week, she rode into town, conducted business, and returned to the Twisted M by evening. The other days, she helped Agatha with the household, learned ranch operations from Xavier and Caleb, and continued improving her riding and shooting skills. Through it all, Xavier had courted her with patience and respect. They rode together on Sundays, explored the furthest reaches of the ranch, and spent evenings reading aloud or simply talking by the fire. He never pressed for more than she was ready to give, though his feelings were evident in every glance, every careful touch. Katherine had healed in ways she hadn't known were possible. The nightmares that had plagued her for months after fleeing Silverwater had gradually faded. She no longer startled at sudden movements or flinched when a man raised his voice. The hollow fear that had been her constant companion for years was replaced by something she had almost forgotten: happiness. Scout barked, drawing Katherine's attention back to the present as the dog raced across the yard to greet Xavier, who was leaving the corral. He spoke briefly to one of the ranch hands, then made his way toward the house, removing his hat as he approached. "Good morning," he called, his smile warming her as reliably as the spring sunshine. "You're up early." "It's a beautiful day," Katherine replied. "Too beautiful to waste sleeping." Xavier climbed the steps to join her on the porch, his gaze taking in her neat riding outfit. "Going into town today?" "Yes, Judge Whittaker has some documents that need processing." She offered him her coffee cup, which he accepted gratefully. "But I was hoping you might ride in with me." "There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity flickered across his face. "Of course. Let me clean up and I'll be ready in 20 minutes. The ride to White Pine was pleasant, the trail now familiar to Katherine after months of regular travel. They talked easily about ranch matters, the news from the latest newspaper, and Caleb's obvious but unspoken affection for the new schoolteacher. In town, they stabled their horses, and Katherine led Xavier not to her office, but to a vacant building at the edge of the main street. It had once been a small mercantile but had stood empty since its owner returned east the previous fall. "What do you think?" Katherine asked as they stood before it. Xavier looked confused. "About the old Wilson place. It's a solid building, good location." "I bought it," Katherine announced. "Or rather, I've made an offer that Mr. Wilson's attorney has accepted." "You bought it?" Xavier's expression shifted from confusion to surprise. "For your notary business," Katherine shook her head, suddenly nervous about her plan. "No, for a different venture altogether." She produced a key from her pocket and unlocked the door, gesturing for Xavier to enter ahead of her. The interior was dusty but spacious, with large windows that flooded the room with light. Empty shelves lined the walls, and a counter ran along one side. "I thought," Katherine began hesitantly, "that White Pine could use a proper bookshop. Nothing grand, but somewhere people could find more than just the newspaper and the occasional catalog." She moved to the center of the room. Children's books, practical guides for ranching and homesteading, maybe even novels and poetry. Xavier turned slowly, surveying the space with new understanding. "A bookshop," he repeated. "The school is growing. Families are settling here rather than just passing through." Katherine's words tumbled out faster as her enthusiasm overcame her nervousness. "People need books, Xavier. Not just for information, but for pleasure, for escape, for seeing beyond their own experiences." "You'd run it yourself?" "Yes, along with my notary work. I've already written to publishers in Denver and San Francisco about regular shipments." She bit her lip. "What do you think? Is it foolish?" Xavier crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Foolish, Katherine, it's brilliant." His eyes shone with pride. "White Pine needs exactly this, and you're exactly the person to provide it." Relief washed through her. You really think so? I know so. He squeezed her hands. You understand what books can mean to people, how they can change lives, offer comfort, inspire dreams. Like they did for me, Katherine said softly, remembering the precious few books that had sustained her during her marriage, providing brief escapes from her reality. Xavier nodded. When will you open? If all goes well with the contracts, I could be ready by midsummer. She glanced around the space, already envisioning shelves filled with books, comfortable chairs for reading, perhaps even a small section for children. I'll need to clean, paint, order fixtures. You'll have help, Xavier promised. The whole ranch will pitch in. Katherine smiled, a warm certainty filling her chest. This was what freedom meant, not just safety from harm, but the ability to create, to contribute, to build something meaningful. There's one more thing, she said, meeting his gaze steadily. I've been thinking about what you said back in the winter, about building something good together. Xavier went very still. I remember. I'm ready now. Katherine stepped closer, courage and love carrying her forward. I'm certain of my feelings and I'm certain of my freedom. Both lead me to you, Xavier. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then he cupped her face gently in his hands. Are you saying what I think you're saying, Katherine Carter? I'm saying that I love you, she replied simply. And if you were to propose now, my answer would be yes. Joy transformed his features. Without a word, Xavier reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Katherine's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small pearl at its center. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment, he confessed. I think you just created it. He took the ring from its box and knelt before her. Katherine Carter, I have loved you since that night on the mountain trail, when you stood in the darkness with nothing but courage and refused to surrender. I will love you for all the days of my life, if you'll do me the honor of becoming my wife. Tears blurred Katherine's vision as she extended her hand. Yes, she whispered. With all my heart, yes. The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. Xavier rose and drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. Later, as they stood on the porch of what would soon be White Pine's only bookshop, Katherine leaned against Xavier's shoulder. Did you really know, even then? That night you gave me the blanket. Xavier considered this. Not know exactly, but I felt something, a connection I couldn't explain. He smiled down at her. And later, when I saw how strong you were, how determined to reclaim your life despite everything you'd endured, how could I not fall in love with you? Katherine thought of the terrified woman she had been, running blindly into the night, and marveled at the journey that had led her here to this man, this love, this future bright with promise. From a blanket to a bookshop, she mused. It's quite a story. Xavier's arm tightened around her. And we're just getting started. They were married in July in the garden behind the twisted Embarks main house, with wildflowers woven into Katherine's hair and sunlight dancing across the mountains. Sheriff Thompson presided, Caleb stood as Xavier's best man, and Agatha wept unabashedly throughout the simple ceremony. The bookshop opened in August, its shelves not yet full but promising growth. Katherine divided her time between the store and the ranch, finding joy in both worlds, the quiet satisfaction of placing the perfect book in a customer's hands, and the wild beauty of riding alongside Xavier as they managed the ever-expanding Twistedem. By Christmas, when the valley lay blanketed in snow and the ranch house glowed with warmth and light, Katherine knew with certainty that she had found not just safety but true happiness. As she sat by the fire, Xavier's hand in hers, surrounded by the family they had created not through blood but through choice and love, she reflected on the long journey from that cold night on the mountain trail. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, noticing her pensive smile. "About blankets," she replied, "and how sometimes the smallest kindness can change everything." Xavier raised her hand to his lips, kissing the ring that now shared her finger with a simple gold band. "It wasn't kindness," he corrected gently. "It was the beginning of our story." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent against the darkness. But within the walls of the home they had built together, Katherine Carter Morrison knew only warmth and love and the sweet certainty of belonging.